It often feels like Windows XP was faster than Windows 11, and if you've had that thought, you're not alone. A lot of people genuinely don't understand why, in 2025, their computer still lags in exactly the same way it did back in 2010, and that's despite the fact that technology has moved forward at an incredible pace. This problem is so widespread that it actually has a name. It's called the Bill Gates Law. But why does this happen? What does Bill Gates have to do with it at all? And most importantly, can this be fixed? Many of you are probably thinking that the only real solution is simple. Just switch to Linux. But don't rush. The answer goes much deeper than that, and we'll get to it a bit later. You've probably heard of Moore's Law at least once, but do you really understand how it affects your everyday computer experience? In short, Moore's Law is an observation stating that the number of transistors on an integrated circuit doubles roughly every 2 years. That leads to a very logical question. Does this mean that your computer's performance also doubles every 2 years? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. The original formulation of Moore's Law dates back to 1965, when it was proposed by Gordon Moore, one of Intel's co-founders. At the time, he predicted that the number of components on a chip would double every year. Later, in 1975, he revised that estimate to once every 2 years. And as it turns out, he was incredibly accurate. Since then, the size of microcomponents really has been shrinking by half roughly every 2 years. In 1974, about 6 micrometers. By 1987, less than 1 micrometer. In 2016, 10 nanometers. Today, 3 nanometers. And by 2027, manufacturers are aiming for 1 nanometer. To put that in perspective, that's 1/1000th of a meter. Yes, 1/1000th of a millimeter. It sounds unbelievable, and honestly, it is impressive. But now, pay attention. This is where the catch is. This is where the real plot twist begins.
So, does Moore's Law actually mean that your computer becomes twice as fast every 2 years? No. Especially if you're using Windows. Most likely, your PC runs exactly the same as it did 2 years ago, 10 years ago, and maybe even back in 2010. And doesn't that contradict Moore's Law? Not really, because Moore's Law applies only to hardware, to physical characteristics and raw computing potential. But once we shift our attention to software, a completely different pattern emerges.
This pattern is often, somewhat humorously, referred to as the Bill Gates Law, named after the founder and former CEO of Microsoft. The idea is simple. Software performance halves approximately every 18 months. In other words, everything that hardware gains over time is simultaneously canceled out by heavier, slower, and more complex software. The result for the average user is painfully familiar. Even if processors become twice as fast, the system feels the same, or even slower. The interaction between these two laws explains why your computer today can feel slower than it did back in 2010. This phenomenon even has alternative names. One of them is Wintel, the alliance of Windows and Intel. What Intel gives you, Microsoft takes away. Or rather, what Intel gives, Bill takes back. This is a playful reference to two legendary figures of the 1990s tech world, Andy Grove and Bill Gates. Once you understand the nature of the problem, a logical question arises. How do you break this vicious cycle? How do you escape the endless race driven by Moore's Law and the Gates Law? You'll find out soon, but first we need to understand how exactly Windows slows itself down over time. Years of discussions, assumptions, and theories have led to multiple viewpoints. Why does Microsoft software become slower year after year? If you dig deep enough, the explanations can be grouped into 3 categories, depending on how you personally view Microsoft. I'll try to explain all 3 perspectives, for those who believe Microsoft is a force for good, for those who are neutral, and even for those who are convinced there's malicious intent behind it all. Let's start with the first viewpoint.
If you truly believe that Microsoft acts with good intentions and genuinely wants to make Windows more convenient and user-friendly, then there is a perfectly logical explanation for why the system slows down over time. It's called feature creep. Simply put, Microsoft developers continuously add new features in an attempt to make Windows comfortable for every possible category of user. The problem is that new features are introduced faster than hardware can realistically keep up. In a way, Microsoft is ahead of its time. So far ahead, in fact, that modern hardware struggles to handle it all. The result is a paradox. By trying to improve the user experience, they end up making it worse because the machines simply can't handle the load. It sounds absurd, but in its own way, it actually makes sense.
Now, the neutral position. If you don't see Microsoft as a savior or an evil empire, but simply as one of many corporations on the market, this explanation might resonate more with you. Personally, this is the perspective I lean toward. And perhaps the real solution lies here. There's a well-known principle called Hanlon's razor, which states, "Never attribute to malice what can be adequately explained by stupidity." From this point of view, the Bill Gates law isn't a conspiracy, it's the result of laziness, limited resources, and technical debt. Windows is a massive, incredibly complex codebase. It's constantly under pressure to add new features while maintaining backward compatibility. As a result, the codebase isn't properly maintained. From this perspective, Windows is simply an overloaded, poorly optimized system filled with dead or outdated code that hangs around as useless baggage. Maybe Microsoft doesn't have enough talented engineers, or maybe priorities are misaligned. We'll probably never know for sure. After all, Windows is closed source.
And finally, for those who genuinely believe that Bill Gates is almost the devil of the tech world, it's easy to accept the idea that the Bill Gates law isn't accidental at all, but a carefully designed strategy. According to this theory, Microsoft may have had an unspoken agreement with Intel. You make processors more powerful, we make software heavier. That way, users constantly feel the need to upgrade. Computers don't become obsolete because of age, they become slow because of software. And manufacturers continue to profit steadily from this cycle.
So here's the main question. How do we fight this? Is it actually possible to make a computer faster instead of just buying a new one every 2 years? And I know what you're thinking. Install Linux and all your problems disappear. And yes, if you're using GNU Linux, most of the issues described so far don't really apply to you. Linux is open source. Thousands of enthusiasts and developers around the world contribute to its development. Because of this, it's unlikely that parts of the system will be abandoned or left inefficient. Even more importantly, the philosophy of the Linux community emphasizes simplicity, lightness, and functionality without excess. Applications are designed to do exactly what they need to do, and nothing more. So yes, Linux can absolutely be one solution to the problem we call the Gates law, but it's not the only one.
There's another idea, one that was proposed long before Gates. Its author was Nicholas Wirth, the creator of the Pascal programming language. In 1995, he formulated what later became known as Wirth's law. Software gets slower faster than hardware gets faster. Wirth argued that one of the main reasons for this is user carelessness. Many users simply don't see the difference between genuinely useful features and purely visual effects. But every animation, every visual flourish, that's additional load on the system. The solution is simple, but not easy. Users need to become more conscious. They need to understand what's happening inside their devices, why certain features exist, and that every interface feature costs resources, time, and ultimately money. You don't need to be an engineer, but having at least a basic understanding of how your technology works is incredibly valuable. Once users start making conscious choices, companies like Microsoft will be forced to respond to that demand. Linux users already have this mindset. They don't chase flashy effects. They don't demand hundreds of pre-installed apps or animated menus. They want just one thing: a system that is fast, stable, and free of unnecessary bloat. And that's where we'll end today. Thank you all so much for watching, and see you next time.